Kia ora, I'm Damien Christie. Welcome to Hindsight, where we take current issues and look at them through the lens of history. We Kiwis are an active bunch, whether it's at the beach, on the sports field, or places like here at the Parnell Bars, where Kiwis have been coming for decades. So given we're so active, why are we, collectively, so fat? Well, that's the topic for this week's show. And as you'll see in this first clip, it's not a new problem, although back then we had some weird ways of dealing with things.
These men jog 10 miles every week to prevent, or to get rid of, surplus weight. If any of them are 40% heavier than they should be, then they are defined as obese. And obesity, or its effects, kills more people in this country than road accidents. New Zealanders are particularly prone to obesity. It's partly our affluence, too often we drive when we should walk, but mostly it's our diet. We live and die off the fat of the land. Kia Toa is Maori for willpower, and this is the Kia Toa Weightwatchers Club at Te Atatu in Auckland. Apart from the benefit of the weekly exercises, there's comfort for these women to know that there are plenty of others with the same problem. All of them are on a diet of some sort, and for many this club has achieved spectacular results. The key to its success is its system of reward and punishment. For the woman who loses the most weight, there is money for a hairdo. But the woman who gains the most weight has to take home a pig.
Thanks for nothing!
At each meeting, every woman is weighed and a record kept of her progress. For the losers, those who have gained weight, comes the humiliation of the song. On the surface, there may be laughter, but deep down, these women know it's no joke.
I am big and fat and I love my food. I am big and fat and I love my food. Oh, what a pig I am.
This is the metabolic unit at Wellington Hospital. If you come here for treatment, it's no longer a social problem, it's a medical one. The women who come here may be no fatter than Mrs. Smith down the road. It's just that something has made them take the matter out of their own hands. A husband's remark, a dress that no longer fits, the impossibility of sticking to a diet that requires cooking 2 separate meals at a time. If you do come here for treatment, it's inevitable that you lose weight. The maximum diet is 600 calories a day.
Your life expectancy is noticeably reduced if you're overweight. Various things account for this. There's a greater incidence of diabetes. If you have an operation, the chances of complications are greater. It's said that if you're a pedestrian, your chances of getting run down are greater because you don't jump out of the car's way as quickly. All these things together add up to reduce your life expectancy.
We caught Selwyn Toogood at his prime. Just back from a lengthy cruise, he now weighs 20 stone. He's always been a big man.
How did you get overweight in the first place?
I've always been overweight. I was always a chubby child. From the age of 2, I've been known as Fatty Four Eyes because I wore glasses and was chubby. A friend rang my mother, and she had come out to see her nephew who was out here. So she rang my mother and said, "Oh, I went out to camp today, dear, to see this boy. I forget his name. Let's call him Charlie. I went out to see Charlie, and who should I see but dear old fat Sel." Now, she didn't think that this would be offensive at all. Now, it so happens that this nephew of hers had homosexual tendencies, and I'm quite sure that if my mother had rung her and said, "Oh, I went out to see Sel today and I saw dear old queer Charlie," there'd have been an uproar. But because it's dear old fat cell, nobody seems to think that this upsets people, that, you know, you should accept this and that you can be the butt of everybody's joke.
So back then, obesity was very much an individual issue. If you were fat, well, go and sort yourself out, especially if you're a woman. But by the mid-1970s, we were starting to realise the problem might be a bit bigger than that.
In this gloomy scene of world want, of food supply falling increasingly behind demand, New Zealand sits like a cartoon image of the idle rich. We are a fat and happy land. And while we may not be getting any happier, it's beginning to seem certain that we're getting fatter and fatter and fatter. Here they are, newly minted, freshly laundered, and all in a neat row. These are tomorrow's obese New Zealanders. Within 2 years of leaving these safe and sterilised walls, the question of whether or not these children will become fat adults will be decided. In these first few years, eating patterns that last a lifetime are established.
Now, would you put your hand over on there for us?
Professor Lyons, working out of the Auckland Medical School, conducted one comprehensive study at Seddon High School in Auckland.
We found that they weren't very healthy, really. Only a third of the children were completely healthy. And in particular, we found a lot of them were overweight, obese. About half of the girls and a third of the boys were overweight.
What are the children eating that causes such figures? Even a cursory examination gives some indication of the answer. This is the Premier Dairy, strategically placed near both Seddon and a neighbouring intermediate school. It's 8:15 a.m.
Something like that. And what do you buy, an ice cream in the morning?
Yeah, and a pie usually at school.
And a pie in the morning?
No, for lunch.
Pie for lunch?
Yeah.
What about after school? Do you ever get anything after school?
Ice cream sometimes. Minus. Over there, see?
Is this fairly normal sort of trade?
Yeah, just in that house.
Not a jacket.
Our food technology industries are superb providers of safe foodstuffs. They provide a reasonably wide range of foodstuffs, but when you analyse what you advertise on television, just sit down for a couple of evenings, which I rarely have time to do, but I'm very interested in the number of advertisements for biscuits, sweets, chocolates. The emphasis is on children. The advertisements, particularly on television, feature young children. And the concept is that this is good, healthy food and good for children.
So I noticed you've got a stand of fruit over there, which are very attractively displayed. Do they ever buy that?
I suppose the ratio would be 1 item of fruit to a dozen donuts. As a parent, I find it revolting. As a businessman, I find it exceedingly attractive.
Having sustained themselves through the morning from Mr. Smith's dairy, those children who haven't brought their lunches with them descend on the school tuck shop. And the story there was nearly the same. It was full of pies, sausage rolls, soft drinks, potato crisps. It's tempting to wonder how much this apparently endless consumption of sweets, ice creams, pastry and soft drinks could be regulated if the school and the parents acted with an enlightened attitude to the health of the children in their care.
I would tend to criticise successive governments, and this is no particular political party, for failing to do more to promote physical education and a sense of well-being and physical activity. I think probably our generation will be criticised for not having put more effort in schools. I think we will also be criticised for not putting more money as a nation, and probably basically through the Department of Education, into health nutrition. Some of the ideas we've been discussing have been around for a while and could have been taught in schools. And I think as a nation of food producers, we have failed in that area.
After the break, why did it take us so long to realise we had a problem? We meet two pioneers in the study of obesity in New Zealand. Welcome back to Hindsight. Before the break, you saw how New Zealand's battle of the bulge is nothing new. In fact, the warning signs were there in the 1970s. Joining me now is a man ahead of his time, one of the founding staff from Auckland Medical School, and a man you saw in one of those stories, Professor Sir John Scott. With him, Dr. Colin Tukui-Tonga, former Director of Public Health, now Chief Executive of the Ministry of Pacific Island Affairs. Sir John, in 1976, you highlighted the issue of advertising of junk foods. You said someone needs to talk to these companies and tell them to do something about their marketing. It didn't happen, did it?
No.
If anything, the advertising has probably got more subtle and more effective over the years, hasn't it?
Oh, it has. Of course it has, because the industry has improved. I mean, they're there to do a job, and they're doing it better than they did.
That story we saw from 1976, was obesity being discussed widely at the time?
Not widely, no, it was not. The big issues in those days were arteries, arterial disease, strokes, coronary attacks, heart attacks in other words, and obesity, because the background was fairly confusing in a scientific sense, it didn't receive the attention it should have.
Colin, when was the first time you heard the word epidemic in relation to obesity?
Oh, it would have been the late 90s, early 2000s. Certainly the word obesity had been used earlier on, aware of that, but when you attach epidemic to that, it means we're talking large numbers, we're talking several countries involved.
If the obesity rates changed so much during the 70s, 80s and 90s, what was going on then that made that happen?
Well, there's lots of possible explanations, but the one that I think is or at least I think is really important, is the availability of fast food. Food high in calories, freely available around the corner.
In terms of the challenges facing Pacifica, where does obesity rate?
Number one. No question in terms of public health issues to challenge. The number one public health challenge for Pacific communities here in New Zealand and in the Pacific. Absolutely no question about it.
How high are those rates?
In some islands, 90%. Here in New Zealand, 2/3, possibly 70%.
John, you blame successive governments for not doing enough in the area of nutrition and exercise. Does that continue to be the case?
I think governments have to accept some responsibility, sometimes for being a bit unpopular. They're very powerful lobbies, the ones that go for fast foods. McDonald's has a lot of clout. Quaker Oats in the United States, Kellogg's have huge clout. And they put large sums of money directing them partly into research, but also into advertising and public education. Governments have not come up with corresponding sums of money.
Colin, you've worked for the government. Is it true that you haven't done enough?
Oh, I think that's a bit harsh. Certainly it took a while to get going, as these things tend to be. When I was Director of Public Health, we actually did a lot of planning, and the then government put in quite a lot of money into the Healthy Eating, Healthy Action program, and it continued for many years after I've left. And these things will take time before we see any real benefit from them, I think.
What are the obstacles in the way of doing something about our obesity problem?
I think more energy needs to go into educating successive generations of children. The advertising industry and the manufacturers are too clever. They're too good.
Do we need to regulate advertising?
Well, I think people have talked about the preference for self-regulation. There's been ample evidence around the world that self-regulation does not work. There has to be some moderation, some intervention on the part of the state, because you're asking people to cut back on the very thing that causes their profitability and livelihood. It just doesn't make sense.
What do we need to do?
Do more, sustain the work, keep it going, particularly the interventions that are going on in communities, in the health sectors, in the schools, just keep going, because it's often we take the foot off the pedal too early and we're back to where we were.
In the image-conscious 1980s, it was all about the body beautiful. Kiwis looked in the mirror and they didn't like what they saw. So the weight loss clinics cranked up again, along with some pretty memorable fitness fads.
Okay, every time we reach, we're gonna go, woo! And lay down!
Jazzercise, the latest and most flamboyant formula for reshaping the body. A goal attracting increasing numbers of New Zealanders for good reason. Mechanisation and a streamlined lifestyle have a lot to answer for in terms of health. It's easy to live a sedentary life, to get through weeks or months with no real exercise. It may not seem to have much effect, But over every overweight person hangs a stream of threats.
It increases the risk for us developing sugar problems like diabetes, if that's running in our families. It tends to make our blood pressure higher, and if we're very overweight, we get into problems with heart disease.
While many New Zealanders are donning the chic leotards for the first time in their lives, a health professional like Dr. John Scott isn't convinced the devotion will last for life.
It will be a fad in the sense that it will have a wave of enthusiasm and then it'll settle down. All these things. I think jogging will go through a phase of tremendous enthusiasm and then a group will carry on. People will go for variety, but there will be a series of phases. Remember the hula hoops and so on, they've come and gone.
After the break, we watch as successive governments take one step forward and two steps back. Plus, we ask our leading expert in obesity whether we'll ever squeeze into those size 12 jeans again. Welcome back to Hindsight. So far, we've seen our country piling on the pounds and nothing being done at a societal level. To be honest, things were getting worse. Take a look at this telling comparison.
School lunches are inspected periodically, and nurse follows up with a talk on good nutrition.
Children who don't bring their own lunch to school can buy only pies and chippies at this tuck shop. New Zealand's reputation as the world's second largest consumers of calories is upheld.
School lunches have continued to represent the front line in the obesity battle. Let's get up to speed.
The government's made it plain in recent months tackling obesity is at the top of its health checklist. And ACT says it's uncovered health officials are preparing a report on slapping extra taxes on fatty foods.
If you want to go out and have a weekly treat at McDonald's or KFC or at Pizza Hut, then you're going to be taxed for that dinner.
1 in 3 Kiwi kids is either overweight or obese.
These children face the prospect of renal dialysis, of heart disease, and a greatly curtailed quality of life and duration of life. We really have to do something about this.
Today, the pressure group Fight the Obesity Epidemic launched a petition calling for Parliament's help. It wants a ban on junk food in school canteens and on advertising certain foods during children's TV programmes.
It's hard to beat a pie on a cold winter's day, and now it's even harder to get one. New rules aimed at controlling obesity came in today, and students at Papatoetoe High were hard-pressed to find anything fattening. Food and drinks are now put into 3 different categories. Pies, cream buns and soft drinks are occasional foods and may only be sold once a term. Schools will be checked, but there won't be any food police.
The previous government spent $4.5 million implementing a policy that stopped kids buying unhealthy food at school. In February, National scrapped it.
One News wanted to know what advice National used to scrap this policy. These documents, released under the Official Information Act.
Along with the papers are dozens of responses from ordinary Kiwis. Few supported the government. Most had harsh criticism for Education Minister Anne Tolley.
All we've got rid of is making those schools the food police, so they still have to promote healthy food and drink to students.
According to new figures, many of us need to make drastic changes. New Zealand has ranked the 3rd fattest nation, just behind the US and Mexico.
Well, you saw her there, fighting the good fight. Joining me now is Dr. Robin Tumeth, co-founder of Fight the Obesity Epidemic. Robin, you said in 1985 when you started practicing the obesity epidemic didn't exist. Does that mean we weren't obese or we didn't recognise there was an epidemic?
I think that obviously there were people around who were obese, and that clip from the 1970s showed that quite high prevalence in some communities, but it wasn't recognised internationally as an epidemic. We certainly didn't recognise it as such here. And the figures for obesity, the obesity rates were very much lower than they are now.
How many New Zealanders are obese?
The percentage of New Zealanders who are obese is 25%, but most New Zealand adults are overweight or obese.
What role does the Pacific community play in that?
Well, I think that the Pacific community are particularly prone to our obesogenic environment, but I think that the majority of morbidly obese New Zealanders will still be Caucasian, and there's been a huge increase in obesity in the well-heeled Caucasian population, so it affects us all.
So rich white people are getting fatter?
Absolutely.
When you formed Fight the Obesity Epidemic in 2001, you said, I think controversially, that individual responsibility is not the answer.
Well, it might have been controversial, but it's true. It was then and it still is. We know that people who are highly motivated, who've got control over every other aspect of their lives, fail to lose weight long term, or significant amounts of weight long term, by dint of personal endeavour. To keep persuading ourselves and them that the solution lies in their hands is a fallacy. This is an entire societal issue. We need to change our environment so that it is easy for people to eat healthily, easy for people to exercise and to control their weight.
We've seen in some of these clips the exercise fads, the jazzercise and whatnot. Did we focus too much on exercise?
Well, I think exercise is fantastic, and we should all do as much exercise as we possibly can, and it's good fun. So I don't think there's anything wrong with promoting exercise. But to suggest that exercise is the solution to the obesity epidemic when we know that the big driver is our diet, I think we're deluding ourselves if we think we can avoid tackling big industry and the promotion of junk food just by asking people to exercise more. The power of advertising is huge. You know, the availability and the promotion of an inappropriate diet. Billions of dollars are put into promoting the wrong types of food for people to eat, and we're susceptible to this.
It's not just advertising, is it though? Because, say for example, when I crave something, I don't crave McDonald's, I crave a pie. You don't see too many pies being advertised on TV. No, that's right. I don't want to overestimate the effect of advertising, but it is portion sizes, for example. It's the way, you know, things are now sold in much, much bigger sizes than they were in the past. And it's the 24-hour availability of food which has changed as well. What is it that causes my pie cravings?
I don't know.
It's fat, isn't it? It's fat content? I think we're hardwired as human beings to seek out high energy food. This is a natural phenomenon. This is why the species has survived in the face of, famine and drought and so forth. So yes, we all like food which is high in energy. You know, everybody, for some people it's chocolate and for some people it's pies, but there's probably the same basic physiological mechanism underlying it. Kids' school lunches seem to be the front line of this fight here. Were you surprised when National overturned the ban on unhealthy foods in tuck shops? Absolutely gobsmacked. The National MPs I've spoken to said this was a touchstone, though, for people out there. It was part of the nanny state, along with small shower heads and that sort of thing. I think it might have been a touchstone for a small percentage of the population, but I can assure that those parliamentarians that the vast majority of the population were delighted that children were only able to buy healthy food at school. And, you know, the newspapers were full of letters to the editor. We received huge amounts of correspondence at FO. People were outraged and tremendously disappointed when this was reversed. Are you optimistic for New Zealand's future? I think so, she said somewhat reservedly. I think we're in a very unique place, both geographically and in terms of our community. We're a sort of a gung-ho and proactive little population, and I think that once we have something in our sights, we can put a lot of energy into it. So I think it's the characteristics of New Zealanders, actually, which maintains my optimism that, although it'll be a long fight, that eventually we're going to get there. That's it for Hindsight this week. Thanks for watching. For more information or extended clips, check out our website. And don't forget to tune in next week when we take a look back at another issue through the archives.
Oh, beautiful. Adam. Make our last rose really big. Right down. Stretch it out. Now roll it. Let's come last. Breathe in. Show me a smile. Hold it there. Beautiful.